Good morning. Welcome to the Convergent Science Network Women in Biomedicine panel. I'm Katrina Nguyen Robertson, and I'm a Science Communications Officer for the Convergent Science Network. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm streaming to you from, and hopefully we have people from all over the place. And I'm glad to see so many people tuning in. But I myself am on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I think in an event where we're all gathered to celebrate science and to celebrate biomedicine, I think it's important that we remember that they are the first scientists of these lands. And that's why we're all here today, because we love science and specifically biomedicine. The talents of women in science and STEM in general are vital to the future of Australia and, let's be honest, the world. Yet it's no secret that women are poorly represented in the STEM workforce. Plus, a study published in the Australian Journal of Education just 2 weeks ago highlighted that female scientists are almost entirely omitted from the Australian curriculums. And we need more Australian female role models out there in science. So, this Convergent Science Network series, Women in Biomedicine, explores the careers of amazing women in biomedicine. We celebrate their successes and chat about their experiences. We will kick off the conversation later, and I'll call on you to ask questions yourselves. And if you'd like to continue the conversation online and share your thoughts, please use the hashtag Women in Biomed and tag us at Conversi. So our speakers today are Tan Le and Alyssa Telfer. So Alyssa Telfer is a patent and trademarks attorney at Phillips, Ormonde, Fitzpatrick. Alyssa has both a Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Engineering, focusing on biomedical engineering. And she's worked as a biomedical engineer in both Australia and the US. Now, she helps companies, clinicians, and researchers to identify and protect their intellectual property for maximum clinical and commercial value, working across different areas of STEM, but also particularly focusing on medtech, the medtech industry, and is a past chair of AusMedTech in Victoria. She is literally an IP star and in the top 250 women in IP, both of those accolades awarded by Managing IP. Now, Tan Le is an innovator in the field of neurotechnology. She arrived in Australia with her family as a refugee from Vietnam. She stayed very involved with the Vietnamese community here in Melbourne and was president of the Vietnamese community of Footscray Association. So yay, Footscray. She worked as a lawyer before shifting her focus to the field of technology, and in 2011 founded EMOTIV, a company developing user-friendly methods of collecting brain data to empower individuals to better understand their own brains. She also has many awards and accolades to her name, including 1998 Young Australian of the Year. I'm not going to fully list them all, but I just want to point out that she is joining us from San Francisco on Labor Day as well. So thank you for giving up a holiday. And I'm looking forward to hearing from both of you. Now, both of you, Alyssa and Tan, you have quite different roles. Could you please briefly share what your roles entail and what day-to-day work looks like for you? Perhaps, Alyssa, we'll start with you.
Sure. Most of my work involves understanding new technologies on a daily basis. So it's quite challenging, but also exciting from that point of view. I understand the technology, but also then the clinical and commercial landscape that our clients are trying to operate in and put together an IP strategy that aims to protect their IP so that they can both translate it out into the community and make a difference with it, but hopefully also fund a business and generate employment. As I've become more senior in my career, a large part of my work is also developing junior attorneys and managing people, both as the practice team leader for the electronics, physics and IT team here at Phillips, Ormonde, Fitzpatrick, and also a board member here at the firm. So juggling lots of balls in the air, but really enjoying the people that I get to do that with.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And Tan.
Yeah, so my role, so I'm the founder and CEO of the company that I started. It's now 12 years. And so the role has evolved a lot over the years. And as a founder and CEO, you really have to grow as your company grows. So in the early part of my career, when the team was smaller, a lot of our effort was around identifying the opportunity space, basically recruiting and hiring the right people in the team to start embarking on the work, finding early product market fit, getting the product out to market. Over the years, the role and responsibility evolves. Now, the team is larger. There's a lot of time that's spent on managing mainly now my direct reports. So my C-suite that reports into me every week, checking on the execution plan and also the vision and strategy for the group. I mean, as the CEO, you kind of want to make sure you focus on the broader picture, where you're going, but also making sure you have a clear eye on how the company's performance is trekking against the objectives that you set yourselves up for in terms of the near-term goals. So it's a big balance, and then obviously you have responsibilities for thought leadership external to your own internal organization, as well as reporting to boards, investors, and others who may be stakeholders in the enterprise as well. So it is a mixed bag of responsibilities, and one that you hopefully continue to evolve and grow with the business as it transforms over time.
So both of you doing a lot of juggling. Then just for those who might not be so familiar with EMOTIV and your work, would you be able to briefly tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so EMOTIV was formed about 12 years ago with a mission to democratize access to brain measurement. When I first started, I realized that I wanted to understand the brain. This is the center for control and experience for everyone, and yet we knew so little about the human brain. And if we could change how, when, why, where we actually measured the brain, we could actually start to piece together a deeper understanding about how our brain works, how it functions, and ultimately help to preserve our brain's resilience over the course of life. And so that's what we started working on. I would say the first decade was really about democratizing access to contextualized neuroscientific research. So we power neuroscience research in 140 countries today. And that's basically, if you think about anybody who wants to figure out what goes on in the brain when you're trekking up a mountain or when you're studying in a classroom, if you're trying to send people to Mars and expose people to really extreme environments, what happens to the human brain when you do all of those things, more often than not, they'll be using one of our technology, hardware, software to support that research.
Awesome. So it sounds like a lot of neuroscience research, and it's definitely very into technology. But you began your career as a lawyer. So how did you decide to jump from law to thinking about, I'm going to move into technology, and without a formal training in biomedicine? How did you kind of learn and keep up with the science in those early days of your endeavor?
Young and foolish. You don't know what you don't know, and that's one of the benefits of youth in many respects. What I really knew was that somehow I had missed the memo growing up as a kid in Footscray with a migrant family, wanting to make sure that I did well academically. The only two very obvious options for most kids, Asian kids, terrible stereotype, was medicine or law. And I basically chose law. And I realized once I started working in the legal profession that whilst it really was a phenomenal challenge and a lot of possibilities for growth, one of the things I realized was that our world was being transformed by technology. We were living in a very pivotal moment in our life as a human species, that we were going to be transformed. Our environment, our lives, our interaction with each other was being transformed every day by technology. And somehow I managed to choose a profession that would keep me on the sidelines, supporting people who were creating technology, but not actually a part of the action. And when you're young, you want to be a part of the action. So I got out very quickly and decided that I wanted to roll up my sleeves and create something too, despite the fact that I didn't have traditional training in engineering, it was something that I had to acquire over time.
Mm. Thank you. Well, Alyssa, you also made a big switch in your career as well. You first practiced as a biomedical engineer and then you moved into the world of IP. Why did you decide to become a patent and trademark attorney, and what was the process like, that jump?
Oh, that's a really good question, and it's funny when you look at Tarn's background and mine. We've almost gone in opposite directions. I've moved from technology into the legal space, whereas Tarn's gone the other way. Look, we did 1 hour on IP when I was studying engineering, and it never really made much of an impression on me until I had worked in the US for a little while and here in Australia as a clinical engineer. And at the time, it was a very tight job market for graduate engineers. There were not a lot of positions available, and I thought I needed to broaden my options. And I had investigated patenting some of the technology I had developed in my honours year, discovered that it had already been done. Not a surprise, my first foray into patent searching. But on a break between engineering jobs, I found a job advertised in the local newspaper. It's sort of expresses my age, I guess, my vintage, when jobs were advertised in newspapers. And so I applied for the role and was lucky to be given the job here at Phillips, Ormonde, Fitzpatrick as a trainee. That did involve requalifying, so on the job learning and sitting, I think it was about 12 exams while I was working. And now the qualification can be obtained by completing a Masters of IP through the universities, but that wasn't available at the time. So it was a lot of extra work, but really interesting work. And the fact that I could apply it in my everyday role as a trainee attorney was really beneficial and sort of solidified the things that I was learning through the academic part of the requalification. And, I have been with this organisation for, it'll be 23 years this week, but the role has changed, the technology has changed, the law has changed, the people have changed. I feel like I haven't really needed to move into a different organisation. Everything's kind of moved around me. And so, it was a very interesting path to follow, and I'm learning new things every day and meeting great people. It's a really rewarding role.
You mentioned that you had maybe an hour or so in your initial degree around IP, but many people might not be familiar with the process of going from an idea to perhaps something tangible and patentable and then maybe commercialized. Can you please explain the process, and then maybe you have something that you want to add as someone who's really doing commercialization?
Oh, I could give the whistle-stop tour in 1 minute or less. So working in biomedical engineering and medical technologies, most of my clients are mostly interested in obtaining patents, but that's only one form of intellectual property protection. There are trademarks, which are brands, and designs, which protect the specific way that things work. And that is often quite important for medical technology companies, particularly if they have a disposable or a consumable component that has got a distinctive visual appearance. It can be a quick and cheaper form of protection. But most of our clients want to get a patent, which is a monopoly right that can last for up to 20 years and essentially protect your exclusive right to exploit a particular technology that you've invented while the patent's in force. And it's a complex process to obtain a patent. You need to draft up a detailed patent specification, which is a document that describes the invention and all of the variations that you have contemplated and different ways that it might work. And the document finishes with these numbered paragraphs called claims, which define the legal monopoly, and that's what a court will go to decide if a competitor's product is infringing. So it is a relatively complex area of law. Because there's no such thing as a worldwide patent. What we do as Australian attorneys for our local Australian innovators is partner with them to work to try to develop a suite of rights in all of the countries that they would like to commercialise their product in, and work with our network of foreign attorneys to make that happen. So it's a long journey. It's sometimes a very challenging one. There's a lot of argumentation that happens with examiners in different countries around the world, but it's really nice over the course of that process to see clients develop their technology and develop the commercial pathway as well. A patent is a very hard-fought and expensive thing to hang on a wall. What we really like to see is the patentees and the patent applicants really work to commercialize their product. And it's exciting for us to see, an idea come to life in a practical and commercializable form.
Thank you. As someone who's gone through it with particular products and ones that you're a bit more invested in because they're sort of your babies that you're bringing into the world, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think what Alyssa has elaborated on is actually super clear on the IP side. And really, when you're thinking about commercializing any venture, it's about thinking about your defensibility, right? How do you sustain a long-term competitive advantage? And so when you think about that lens, your IP is one part of providing you with that level of defensibility or that competitive advantage. Another one that Alyssa mentioned briefly is your brand, right? If you build a strong brand, then that also provides you with some defensibility. In our case, we really focused on network effects and a data moat. The way that network effects works is that the more people that use your technology, the better the next user can take advantage of what's already been built. And so because of that, you create this very virtuous flywheel that allows you to maintain a longer form of defensibility. And so that was what we did with the research community, because researchers want to build on top of research, right? You want to discover and understand a field, and the more you understand a particular field and you have more data, more algorithms that can support a certain understanding of the brain, then others will want to use that same piece of technology and that new IP that's been discovered in order to advance something in addition to that. It saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of essentially just starting over. And so that's one way that you can create some more competitive advantages. But when you think about, as an entrepreneur, what we think about, the underlying question is, how do you maintain a long-term sustainable competitive advantage? And it can come from different forms. You just need to find and identify the thing that really works for your particular business.
Thank you. So you've carved your niche and found things that worked for you. What are the sorts of challenges that you faced when you established and you're still continuing to grow EMOTIV? And are there sort of any noticeable differences in running a business like that in the US compared to Australia? Because obviously you've gone over to San Francisco and started a new life and a new company there.
Yeah. I think it's easier to build a technology company here in the US, especially one that's rooted in hard tech or frontier tech, as we call it here. You have a larger collection of a pool of talent that you can draw from. There are more people that understand, that have already been there, done that, that understands how technology companies are formed and scaled. And so that certainly helps to be in the epicenter of innovation, right? To be surrounded by that. One thing that Alyssa mentioned is, she's constantly looking at how the technology field is evolving and what impact that has on her practice. Similarly, for any entrepreneur, you're constantly looking at the technological environment that you are working in and how it's going to intersect or dovetail with what it is that you're creating, and how do you actually form a roadmap that allows you to maintain that advantage. And so being here in the epicenter of innovation and being in close proximity to a lot of the thinking and a lot of the inventors, a lot of the people who are spending their lives thinking about how the world is going to change, and actually going out and making the changes that they want to see in the world, allows you to just continually refine your thinking and your assessment as to what the future world will look like and what your role will be in that new context. And so that's really exciting. And I think it's been a lot easier for me to work here in the US relative to when I left Australia, which granted is a very long time ago. I think as Australia has also evolved remarkably in the area of science and technology. And I think it's easier today than it was back in 2005 when I left.
And I want to talk about future prospects as well, and what both of you think of the future of technology and medicine. But before we get onto that, I just wondered, Alyssa, how do you use your scientific background and biomedical knowledge in your job now?
All the time. I think studying engineering is really the study of, understanding systems and how they work in order to solve problems. And so I use my, I guess, tactics as an engineer all the time in my life at work and outside of work, to solve problems for, the prosecution of a client's patent application, but also in dealing with people. I mean, people are essentially large systems of individual working parts operating together, hopefully to produce an outcome that's more than just the sum of their parts, and to understand how that system of people work together to bring the best out of them is, can be broken down into a problem that, engineers are trained to solve. We just use different tools. And I think, a big part of being a good engineer is to understand how to get the best out of a team of people, because these problems are very rarely solved by one person in isolation. And, Tan talked about being in the epicenter of, a group of entrepreneurs and people who understand technology and where it's going. And, I think here in Melbourne, we also have a great culture of collaboration, a great network of people in biomedicine and medtech who do collaborate and work together to solve real problems, in healthcare and wellness, and neuroscience is another great example. And I think perhaps where we could do more is in the translation of taking those solutions to those problems from a research domain into a domain that has more impact on, those groups of people who could really benefit from the solutions that are being developed by, this world-class research that does arise from, collaboration and people working together. So, back to your question, I do apply my engineering skills. The engineering per se is probably well outdated. It certainly is well outdated now, with the advent of all sorts of new computing platforms and generative AI. But, as an engineer, you're taught to learn, you're taught to have an inquiring mind. I think if you can approach life and approach work with curiosity, great things can come from that.
Alyssa, you talked about the collaboration, which is so important, and you sort of talked about it as well. Some people consider biomedical research in academia and industry as two quite separate things or quite distinct things. And I was just wondering, based on your experiences both in Australia and in the US, do you find that to be the case, or is there actually a lot more collaboration and crosstalk than we might think? And if it's a good thing, like, how do we encourage more of it? Maybe Alyssa, will start with you and then go to Dun.
I think that there is a wide spectrum in the research/academic sector in Australia. I think, there has been an identification by government and policymakers here in Australia that we do need to have better sort of crosstalk between industry and academia. I think some academics do it very well. They are naturally highly connected with, industry, with those organisations, those universities, for instance, that undertake contract research are really well connected with industry and do a great job of conducting research that does have solutions that can be embedded in industrial application. Then at the other end of the spectrum, I think there are researchers who only want to do research and don't have very much interest or appetite for engaging with industry. And I think there's a place for both. I think translation is really important, and I keep talking about that because that's the space that I sit in. But I also understand that, without blue sky research that doesn't necessarily have an industrial application, sometimes you won't make those great leaps that are really necessary to push frontiers of some of the enabling technologies. And I think we are doing a better job now of linking researchers with industry. I think, in my work on a day-to-day basis, I see a lot of researchers who are working in collaboration with researchers at other research organisations, as well as having, industry sponsors and industry partners who are seeking to, take licenses to the IP that they're developing when the industry partner realizes that they don't have the people or the technology in their own organization to solve the problems that they need. And so they go and seek those partnerships. And I am seeing more of that, which is really encouraging.
Absolutely. Done. Did you want to add anything?
Well, I think Alyssa responded very well to that. It truly is a spectrum. It's not something that is a one size fits all in terms of how collaborations happen, but the value is clearly there. And what we find, particularly in the context of the US, is that there are much more established norms around how academics can actually participate and interact with industry, largely around the intellectual property rights, right? A lot of the challenges associated with companies taking on academic researchers or academic research is the sort of landmine and complexity baked into the IP situation, right? So who owns the IP? How is the joint IP going to be commercialized? Who gets rights to what? And that can be quite a complex area. In the past, one of the big downfalls that we've experienced is just that environment, if it's not really conducive to commercial collaboration, then it does limit the level of innovation and collaboration that can happen. And so if you can, as we think about the policy considerations on how we can encourage deeper collaboration between academics and industry, we do need to think about an appropriate framework to really facilitate this, because this has in the past been one of the drawbacks that has made the challenge more difficult than it needs to be. And certainly in the context of the US, they've been able to solve that quite effectively.
Yeah, it's good to hear that there's a lot more.
I've seen that too, Tan, where there's great IP, there wants to be a partnership, but they're in whoever's controlling the technology transfer in terms of the legal structure between the two collaborating entities. There are roadblocks set up for almost reasons of principle, which don't result in great outcomes if there's no sort of rational basis for wanting something in an agreement or in an undertaking that the parties are sort of trying to get into. So I agree. I think, there needs to be rational thinking and a partnership. There can't be a winner and a loser. There's got to be, mutual benefit to all the parties involved. Otherwise, it's not truly a collaboration.
Absolutely. Well put. Thank you. Now, to those of you who are tuning in, you are more than welcome to ask your own questions of our two speakers. If you have a question, you can put it in the comments and I will pass it along. I do have more of my own though while we're waiting for questions to come in, but just getting your thinking turned on. If you do have a question, just pop it in the chat. A question kind of off the back of collaboration, more thinking about the diversity of the field. Do you think it's more important to have, do you think it's important to have more women with science degrees represented in the medtech industry? And if so, how can we create an environment that encourages women to move into the space and then support those who are in there? Maybe Alyssa, we'll start with you and then go to Dun.
Gosh, that's a big question, Katrin. Yes, we could use more women from science, from law, from economics, from everywhere involved in the leadership of industries everywhere, including medtech. I think that in some ways, science and biomedicine is more accessible for women who are early career scientists. I think, it's the classic challenge of what happens when families start and, flexible working is probably going to change a lot of remove some of the barriers, I think, that were there when early career researchers tried to move along a career trajectory that might take them into, leadership roles within medtech. But we're not there yet. And I think, I'm not sure what all the solutions are. I think men and women have a role to play in creating space for women in leadership in all sectors and industries. And there are some systemic and structural challenges around childcare availability, childcare cost, that are beyond our control, I think, except to the extent that we can engage with, policymakers and political leaders to help them to understand how that could transform the progress of women, and how they advance their careers. But it's definitely something we could do more of, yes.
Dun, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, this is, the issue of women's representation in male-dominated industries is a challenge that we've got, that's quite systemic for a long time, and there have been a lot of effort by other women who have pioneered the path forward. As a mother of a 4-year-old girl, I'm very cognizant of the fact that we need to create environments that will encourage our girls to feel comfort in all of the possibilities, right, that they might want to pursue in their life as a person. And that includes any industry, not limited to STEM, but this is one of the areas where we have traditionally seen a lower representation. I think over time, at least in recent years, what we've seen is that it's less of a pipeline issue. But once we get to industry, there's a number of challenges that young women face. One is in the workforce. If people are going into startup organizations, sometimes the culture inside those organizations are so entrenched that it can be very difficult. It doesn't even have to be a startup culture, right? I'm just more that's a world that I'm very familiar with. But even in traditional industries, whether it be law, finance, engineering, we do have some very entrenched cultures where if you are one of a minority group, leadership within those organizations need to be very thoughtful about the culture that you want to create inside those organizations to be able to nurture a different perspective, a different voice, a different challenge. It's not easy, but it is incumbent on those who are fortunate enough to be in the leadership role to take on that challenge, because without taking on that challenge, we're not going to be able to make the change possible, right, for our kids and the future generations, and let alone all of the people who are going through that challenge today. And I mean, Alyssa talked about some of the structural and systemic challenges that women face. I mean, the reality is women are able to give life, and that is something that only we can do. And because of that, there are very specific needs that we have as women. When I gave birth to my little girl, there were moments where I needed a safe space to breastfeed, to pump. There are very, very specific needs, and it's hard if you haven't been there. If you don't have to do that, you don't understand the empathy, the compassion that you need to foster inside a workplace to create space for women who are experiencing that. And I think it's very we have a lot of male champions, but it is harder for a man who hasn't experienced that to be able to have the full compassion and empathy for a peer who is experiencing this. And so I think we need to create environments where women can lead organizations, because we have a slightly different experience of life, just because of the lived experience that we have. And this is something that we need to foster, and it will take time. We have made a lot of progress, but we are on a very long journey before we will get to any form of parity.
Mm-hmm. And it's exactly that different lived experience that allows us to bring new ideas and thoughts to solve global challenges. Sorry, Alyssa, you were going to say something?
Oh, that's absolutely right, Catriona. And, in Australia, I keep hearing that we have a productivity problem. And, women can be a big part of that solution if space is created for women to perform at their best in the workplace, and, to add to the innovation and add to, the value that we bring to the economy. But while we don't have anywhere near equal representation of women in leadership, it's very hard for those structural changes to be made, because, as Tan says, the empathy, the understanding of really what needs to evolve in order for us to get there. Just it can't be understood, as you say, without the lived experience necessarily. It makes it much harder. I was watching a program recently where they were talking about paid parental leave and what happens with families with multiple birth pregnancies. Typically the babies are born sooner, so they start using their parental leave earlier, and the cost of having 3 or 4 children at once is so much higher. But at the moment, they're only entitled to the same parental leave payments that a single child birth situation would be entitled to, and that just doesn't make sense to me. But until women are having conversations with the policymakers around that type of thing, that's one example that doesn't affect very many people, but it's an example that I think is a really live one of, having women at the table providing input to these conversations can have real difference in structural reform that can open things up, and I think also give a better, more enriching life experience for men as well, who don't necessarily have to comply with these societal norms of, I'm the breadwinner, I have to be the boss, I have to be the person doing this. We need to open up for everyone to have a fully enriched life that involves work and the things outside of work without these societal expectations providing barriers for both men and women in, how they choose to live their lives.
I think you've both touched on so many different things that are sort of systemic that need to happen or need to change. But I want to focus specifically on business now, because this is something that we spoke about just before we went live on air. And I think sometimes driven, ambitious and successful women in business are not viewed in quite the same way as men who are, exactly the same amount of driven and ambitious and successful. So Dan, as someone who has kind of gone through this yourself, have you faced barriers to being accepted as a woman in quite male-dominated fields, particularly in startup and business and entrepreneurship?
I think it's hard to meet anyone who is different. When I first started, I was considered relatively young. I have an Asian heritage, which is not as common as what's also a minority group, and also being a woman. And then, I'm also not from the States either, and I chose to move here. So a lot of reasons why I am quite different to other folks here. The nice thing about at least my experience in the US is that there is a lot of people who have come from lots of different places. Much like Australia, there is a lot of good examples of how people who are different can be successful and achieve amazing things. Having said that, people pattern match, right? When you look at the venture capital that's gone into women-led businesses, in 2022, around 2% of all venture capital went into women-led businesses. And this is a statistic that has been pretty much the same for the last 15 years, right? So it is something that we have tried to move the needle on. There are more women who are venture partners. There are more women investors. There are more women, female entrepreneurs who have made it. But still, there is this bias because, unfortunately, as people, our brains are wired to make very swift decisions based on what we know. That's our comfort level, and we pattern match based on the things that we know, we understand. And so when you say, are women labeled differently when they exhibit similar characteristics to men, such as driven, motivated, ambitious? I think the challenge is that is not the cultural norm that we, for so many generations, have come to expect of our women. And so when you see someone like that, it kind of is not what you would typically expect. And so it's hard to pattern match. And so the default is to do something that's much easier. A lot of the function of investment is to, one, to make sure that you play for the upside, but also to mitigate and avoid risks as well, or risks that you don't really quite understand or perceive or can wrap your head around it. It's much easier to say, you know what, I'm going to just invest in that person because it looks familiar. I went to school, I know this kind of person, I know their track record, it makes sense to me. It's much harder to do something that's different that you haven't done before, you haven't seen it before. And if it works out, it's great. But if it doesn't work out, then it's much harder to say, well, to justify why you made an investment in somebody who bucks all characteristics and all norms of what people would expect. And so this is the barrier that women face, right? It is much harder for women to start new companies, to get the venture funding that they need. And so a lot of women, despite all of that, they make it despite all of the challenges that they may be confronted with. They find alternative routes to capital, they find grants, they get their business to be profitable, to be self-sustaining, because they don't have the options, quite frankly, that's available to them. And so operating in that very constrained set of scenarios forces you to do things differently. But that's certainly not the way that most women should have to experience their life as an entrepreneur or as a female executive.
Well, Alyssa, you see a lot of people who are applying for intellectual property and applying to, kind of put themselves out there in business. What have you seen in terms of that sort of balance between men and women and how women are viewed in that world?
Look, I think in businesses today, there's a lot higher awareness of our own biases and how that plays out in recruitment and development and progressing careers of people already in our organisations. And I think, it's funny when Town talks about people almost fearing differences and trying to align with either investment opportunities or teams that are like them because it's what they know and they understand. And I probably did feel that. I think at the time I didn't pay any attention to it, but in retrospect now I look back on my career, I think I was subconsciously very aware of the differences that I had as a young female going into a male-dominated career profession. And certainly, dressing in a suit that looked very similar to theirs. I didn't wear skirts. I'm not really a skirt wearer anyway, but, I didn't feel compelled to present my differences by looking different. I probably tried to look more the same, express myself in a similar way to try and diminish the differences, because I think subconsciously I recognized that they were more comfortable around people that looked and sounded and dressed and conducted themselves like them. I think, as women become more senior in their careers, they do have a role to play in speaking out more and encouraging people to bring their whole selves to their workplace. And I think that brings with it new opportunities to see things differently. If you start conditioning yourself to think exactly the same way as the people above you, maybe you miss opportunities to see things differently that could be beneficial. So, it's a fine balance. I think we do have to be aware of the environment we're operating in and make the most of it. Sometimes that means working harder and faster and achieving things that perhaps other people that don't have these differences wouldn't have to do. But it also, I think, being an outsider does give you a fresh perspective that maybe those other people aren't aware of. They miss opportunities because there's this assumed opportunity that they perhaps have a sense of entitlement for. I don't like that word, but, for lack of a better one, I think sometimes when you're an outsider, you see things differently, and that actually creates new opportunities for you. So it's not always a bad thing. But yeah, different lot of challenges for sure as a woman.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So challenges as a woman, but it's nice to hopefully be able to see more people celebrating their own uniqueness and what they bring to the table. Tan, you're not just facing barriers as potentially a woman, but also you mentioned that you're kind of a minority with your background as well. So you arrived in Australia as a refugee, and now you've kind of moved again from Australia to the US. How has your life experience and your personal experience sort of influenced your work?
Well, I think what Alyssa's, I did a TED talk where some years ago, and one of the things that I discovered as I put that together was how much I had embraced this identity of being an outsider, and how embracing that uniqueness has shaped me and the choices that I've made. I think it's very hard when you're growing up and facing all of the challenges associated with being different to recognize how much of a strength that is. But for me, now having the benefit of a couple of decades of my career, looking back, I realized how much that difference has helped me, to start and have a completely different view, to start my company, to do it the way that I have, to forge my own path. I think a lot of that I have benefited so much from having been a refugee from Vietnam, starting with absolutely nothing, not feeling that I really had anything to lose if things were to not work out, and having the incredible example of my mother's resilience and tenacity and belief in the future, right? Her belief and her hope for a better life, a better world from my sister and I was so inspiring. And so when I look at my own life and the struggles, the challenges, the hardships that I have to contend with, they seem so small in comparison to the life and death choices that she had to make and the sacrifices that she had to make. And so having that background of a lot more adversity growing up makes the challenges that you face throughout your career seem somewhat more manageable, and things that you can overcome, and you somehow build in a lot of resilience and a tolerance for failure should it occur. And so you give yourself some scope to pick yourself up and to continue that learning journey. And I think that's really important. I've often said that failure is a fantastic teacher. It's really hard to learn from a lot of successes in life. And sometimes you go through thinking, you know what, this is really easy. But I think failure teaches us a lot about ourselves. It teaches us a lot about how you might approach things differently. And I am a big believer in people who have the capacity to learn from failure and to have the humility to think through that process and to reflect on their own learning, and to forge new possibilities when they are confronted with new challenges. And I think that's really, really fantastic. I try to teach my little girl that now. So I'm hoping that she's going to be one who will feel comfortable about taking risks, about challenging herself to try new things, and to be okay about failure, because they're two sides of the same coin, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Failure teaches you so much.
And I hope in society that's something that maybe helps girls who study STEM be more resilient in this environment we live in now, with these platforms where people are presenting perfection on Instagram and various other social media platforms. I hope that as scientists, when we learn to hypothesize, test and fail, and it's okay, we build resilience in ourselves that we can apply in life generally. It's really an important skill that I totally agree. And my family were migrants in Australia, my parents, and I feel like I learned a lot from them. There was a cyclone in Darwin in 1972 where their house was blown away and they had to start again, and I feel like hearing their stories made me appreciate what they had created for me as well, and that I had to work hard to sort of respect the path that they'd laid for me. And I think, when you hear stories of other people's toil and failure and successes, it gives some perspective of your own life and choices and where you're at. And I think, it's okay to fail. And as Tan says, that's often where you learn the most about yourself and about whatever the experience was.
Thank you. I see that a question has come into the chat. Excellent. If you do have questions, please remember that you can pop them into the comments in YouTube. Huran asks, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Huran has a question for Alyssa, saying that they love how you related engineering systems to human systems. Do you have some frameworks or approaches that you use when working with human systems and thinking about biomedicine and medicine to kind of enhance the way that you think about collaboration and outcomes? So really seeing all those kinds of fields of STEM coming together.
Yeah, I think, the system and being curious about the system. I think, as humans, we are programmed to make quick assumptions about people based on either their appearance or their CV or their name or their behavior. Someone's coming to late to work or they must have slept in. I think going into relationships with other people with curiosity and, letting them present what they think and being open is something that I've learned from engineering. Try not to make too many assumptions that don't have evidence behind them. And I think sometimes, we do have our biases because sometimes you can only make a decision in a very short period of time, and you have limited information. And sometimes you make the wrong decision, sometimes you make the right one. But I think, applying a somewhat scientific approach, at the end of the day, humans are humans and they don't necessarily behave the way you expect. But, looking for evidence, being considerate of how people are and not just treating them like, machines doing work. They sometimes, and that's what I love about people being back in the office. We did a couple of years of remote working, and coming into work and seeing how people are at work, the shape of their body, how they're interacting tells you a lot about how they're feeling. And at the end of the day, you get the best out of people when they're feeling safe and comfortable and at their best. And sometimes you need more inputs to your, decision-making process to make the right decision.
Speaking of technology, as someone who is at the forefront of like a lot of technology and science and innovation, both where you are in terms of your field and geographically, do you see much change in the technology and the science that underpins your products and things around you over the next 5 years?
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be an incredible 5 years of transformation in terms of the hardware, the types of devices that we'll be able to wear that will give every single one of us insight into what's going on in our brain, but also the convergence with artificial intelligence. We'll start to see augmentation happen, right? So many forms of co-pilots will start to augment and enhance what we do every day. And so that's really exciting when you combine neurotechnology that gives you a really good understanding of what's happening to that individual. How does the individual experience the world around them, and then connect that with AI to kind of enhance that. That's really an incredible opportunity space.
I agree that AI is going to be a big part of where we see innovation head in the future. It doesn't come without challenges, but already we're seeing, AI and the, computational power being the big enabler for pushing a lot of innovation at the moment, in identifying better drug candidates and predicting how different biological systems are going to interact. But for me, where I'm seeing really exciting innovation is at the interface of what were really traditional domains. So where biotechnology meets devices, and where we look at biological interfaces for hardware and sensors and that type of technology. So it's definitely an exciting time that we're working in. I think quantum computing is going to be the next great enabler that gives us the possibility of miniaturizing and accelerating a lot of the computer implemented innovation that we currently perhaps struggling to progress on.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Sorry, I had muted myself, but I did, want to hear your views as someone who does see a lot of waves and new ideas come through in medtech. Can I just ask both of you in 60 seconds or less, what would be your piece of advice that you give to people who are studying biomedicine or coming into the field? Perhaps, Dan, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, the future is yet to be invented. So, embrace the possibilities, right? There is so much that we still don't know, and there's so much that we can do for humanity. There is a there are massive challenges that is confronting us as individuals and as well as our world. And so, you are the future. You are the people that will continue to innovate and will continue to invent and will help us hopefully create a better future for our children. And so I'm hoping that you'll jump right in and be the change that you want to see in the world.
Absolutely. I noticed a few names of people who are joining in. We've got a lot of bright people out there. You're going to change the world for us. Alyssa, what about yourself?
I totally agree. I think, the future needs people in science and innovation. And I think it's not always an easy road, but it can be so rewarding, both in, the outputs that you generate in terms of pushing the frontiers of science and engineering, but also the amazing people that you get to do it with. A career in science has given me the opportunity to meet people like Tan and yourself, Katrina, and many others, that have literally changed people's lives for the better, and I find that immensely rewarding, and I can't think of how that could have come to pass had I not studied science and engineering. So I think it's a great vocation. A lot of scientists end up in management roles. They don't necessarily end up doing research or end up doing science per se, but it is such a fantastic grounding for understanding how to research, how to learn, how to push your knowledge of things, and I think that it provides the great basis of a career in many different directions. But go science and engineering.
Yeah, go science and engineering. I think that's a lovely note to end on. So thank you so much for your time, Dunle and Alyssa Telfer, especially Dun coming on a holiday. I'm going to give you a round of applause, and I'm sure people who are tuning in would give you a round of applause too if they were here in person. Just to all of those of you who have come today, and some of you might still be hanging around, you'll receive an email asking you to complete an anonymous survey, and we would really appreciate your feedback as we plan future events like this. And the next event for the Women in Biomedicine series will take place on Monday, the 16th of October, and feature Megan Munsey from the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and Susan Nilsson from the CSIRO. So details will be available soon on the Convergent Science Network website. Speaking of CSN, Convergent Science Network, thank you so much to the members and associate members of the network. We really wouldn't be able to run events like this without them, so I'm going to give them a clap too. And the Convergent Science Network does have an extensive video library, and we encourage you to visit and discover some amazing science talks. I've definitely learned so much from incredible people like Tun and Alyssa and many others as well. You learn fascinating things, including fun facts to bring up in conversation. So I definitely recommend checking out those videos. Thank you so much again, Tun and Alyssa, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.